welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. I feel like I'm looking very fall here, but I promised our project today is very summer. Today I have decided to make a 1940s playsuit. I feel like I make one of these sets about once a year, and I really love making them, but more importantly, I love wearing them. So I have selected a pattern. This is Simplicity 2014, and it is a Mrs. Shorts midriff top and skirt. The front buttoning top fitted with darts features a low sweetheart neckline and puff sleeves. The shorts cut out in 4 sections will have gathers at the front waistline and darts at the back waistline. That's actually really interesting to have gathers at the front and darts in the back. So I'll be curious what that looks like. Yeah, you have something to say? Oh, I don't know if you heard her scream, but she is lively today. Patch pockets enhance the dirndl skirt. Embroidered edging trims the skirt and contrasting embroidery. Fabric finishes the sleeve on style 2. Rickrack is used, but I don't want to use too much trim because I do really like my fabric, which is this one. So if you recall, I picked this up while I was in Korea. It has what I have now learned are alpine berries and cherries woven into these really lovely stripes. It's kind of a seersucker, and I just think this would make a really pretty 2-piece set. I'm really excited to use this fabric. It is, though, I would say like the tiniest bit sheer. So I have selected a couple different of my cottons in my stash to potentially line it with. I'll show you how I end up doing that and what I end up using. I will for sure line, I think, the top and the shorts. The skirt I might not line because I can always wear a slip under it, or the shorts might be directly under it, so we'll see. But I do think I'll need to use a little bit of lining on these. But I am very excited because yes, I've really wanted to use this fabric, and when I bought it I definitely had the intention of making it a set because I think that this type of fabric with the blue and the vegetables and the cherries will really mix and match well with other pieces in my wardrobe. I was supposed to have 4 days to do this project, but now I'm very busy all those days, so we'll see when I get this done. It might be in the evenings after work. It might be just squeezed in with smaller bits of time. I like to usually do a solid 8-hour sewing day. I don't think I'm going to get that for this project, so we're just gonna have to play by ear how much time and what I'm actually doing when I'm working on it. But with that, let's go ahead and hop into the cutting. First, I'm going to start by cutting out my skirt and bodice pieces. The skirt pieces are pretty straightforward since they're just straight up on stripes and they are rectangular pieces, so that's really nice. The rest of this gets a little bit more complicated. I have decided this one to be really careful about my stripe placement. Sometimes I don't care as much, but this is really special fabric to me since it's from Korea and I really want to do it justice. So I am taking tons of care to line up each piece the way I want. Also, one of the biggest reasons I work with stripes is because there's a lot of really fun stripe play type things you can do with them. And one of the reasons I chose this pattern for this fabric was because I wanted to really play with some stripes. This does mean I'm going to go rogue and cut some pieces off grain and on the bias, but I'm going to be really careful about those pieces and making sure they don't stretch. For the ones being cut on the bias, I'm only choosing to do part of the sleeve puff as well as the pockets. So the shorts is where I want to be particularly careful about my stripes aligning. So what I'm going to be doing here is cutting one piece and then laying that piece on the fabric and then cutting the second piece so that way the stripes match exactly. This is how I've seen other people do it, and most of the time I don't care enough to get it that precise, but like I said, this time I do, and so that is the method I am doing here for both the shorts front and the shorts back. And while I finish up the rest of my cutting, I just want to remind you that I do have a Ko-fi where you can go and buy me a coffee to help support my channel. I put a lot of time and labor into it, and I always really appreciate it. And the last bit of cutting out I'm doing is for the lining. For this, I just need the bodice and the shorts to be lined. I don't really care about anything else. This is just so that way I don't have to always worry about my underwear being perfectly nude, or I can wear this without a bra or my bra won't show. So that is what I'm doing here. The instructions do not mention anything about a lining. This is just me going rogue. And then the last thing I'm doing is cutting out the interfacing. For this, I'm just using it on the waistbands. Again, instructions don't clarify this, but I like my waistbands to be a little firmer so they're less likely to roll. I use interfacing, and that's what I'm doing here. First thing I'm doing is working on the shorts. In theory, the level of difficulty should be bodice most difficulty, shorts second most difficulty, and skirt easiest. So I want to start with semi-easy and then go into the bodice and then end with the skirt, which is going to feel like a breeze compared to the bodice. So here I am first pinning all my darts. After sewing them, I am then going to press this. This one that you're seeing is for the lining. I am doing everything to the lining that I'm doing to the normal part of the shorts. And then the first seam it has me do here is the back seam, like around the butt, and then the crotch seam. This is just the method for this one. Everyone has a different method, and I am sewing this with the regular 4/8 seam allowance. That is what is usually allowed for 1940s patterns. Next, I am pressing these open, which is where I will finally find out how I did on my stripe matching, and I did rather well, and I'm really pleased because I worked really hard to have these match really well. Now the next step is to sew the inseam seam together as well as the side seams, but I am going to leave a gap open on one of the side seams because that will be where the zipper goes. My first step with attaching the lining is to attach it where the zipper is. So that is what I'm doing here by pinning the right sides together and having the lining opening and the outer fabric opening pinned together to get ready to sew. And then I'm first sewing those together using 2 separate lines of stitching, and then after I have that done, I'm going to understitch. The reason I'm understitching is I want a really clean zipper line without the lining poking out, and hopefully understitching will give me that. All this I'm doing kind of on the fly because this is not in the pattern instruction, so I'm just using kind of things that I've learned before and testing them to see if they work this way, which they do. So that's kind of cool. Another way you could do this is by putting the zipper in and then slip stitching the lining so then the zipper is completely enclosed in the lining and doesn't touch your skin. I didn't think about doing that that way because that is a technique I learned recently. So in this case, I did the understitching and the regular stitching for the zipper opening. And then after that, I am going to baste the lining waist to the shorts waist. And then it's time to do the zipper. I'm doing a classic placket, so one side will be right against the zipper and the other I'll be a little bit away from the zipper, causing a little bit of a flap that will then cover the zipper in theory from the front. I am doing this with no pins because that is the method that works best for me. And here I am putting in those gathering stitches that will be right at the front of the shorts. Now that I'm done, I'm fusing the interfacing using a iron and a press cloth to the waistband, so that way I will be ready to sew that in. Once that is done, I am pinning it to the front of the shorts, so right sides together. That way that front will have a nice neat line, and then I'll flip it up and over and slip stitch it down on the inside. When I am stitching this part, I am stitching the tab part of the waistband, which is really important since that's what will hold the button. And then I am clipping my corners to get a nice neat press, before then folding over the inside so it's a nice clean edge to prepare it to be stitched down. And here I'm enjoying that hand sewing. Hand sewing is always one of my favorite parts of these projects as long as there is not too much. And then after trying them on, I'm going to work on the hem. The hem for the lining, I'm cutting an inch shorter than the hem for the shorts because the lining I don't want peeking out in any way, shape, or form. This is really just extra cover for my underwear. So I'm first marking that out with a pen before I will then go in and cut it with scissors. Once that is done, I am just folding over the outside fabric, the main fabric, just one time because then I will slip stitch this down eventually. And then for the lining, I'm just going to go ahead and do a double turn hem because it'll be on the inside and it's not as important to me for that to have a very invisible hand finish. I am only turning this over about an inch or so because I want these to still stay pretty close to the length they were from the pattern. So I'm now stitching these down with nice tiny invisible stitches. Good morning, or afternoon, I guess. It is about 12:30, so I am going to start sewing here pretty shortly. So I have only done the shorts and cut out the fabric at this point, which I think took me 5 hours and 45 minutes. Here are the shorts. They're pretty much done except for the buttonhole. I'm gonna do all my buttonholes last because, gosh darn it, I have hiccups. Because I think that is going to be the best option because then they'll all be the same. I've tried these on, these look great. The shorts themselves, if you don't count out all the cutting, I think only took me like 2 hours, 45 minutes, which is pretty great. And I need to make some more shorts this summer because I enjoy wearing them. And these are really cute. So with these done, I just have the top and the skirt left. We have an early release at work today, so I have from now until bedtime to work on these. However, there's a few hours in that where the sun is coming too much into my sewing space for me to film. So we'll see basically what I can get done. I'm going to start with the top because the top is the most complex item. And so my strategy in doing this was basically easiest item, which is the shorts, most complex, second easiest item. So that way, like, I can pace myself. So today we are going to jump into the most complex one right away. So let's do it. Oh, hiccups. And with it being a new day, it is time to start on some new darts. So first I am marking these out before then pinning them and getting ready to sew them. After sewing them, I like to tie them off with a knot. There's other ways to finish them, but this is my favorite. Also, sorry if you hear weird crashing noise in the background. I don't know why, but the train tracks seem quite wild today. And remember, anything I am doing to the outside, I am also doing to the lining. With the darts done, I am now pinning the side seams and the shoulder seams together to put the front and the back of the bodice together. The other thing I am working on is the facing. This is actually really interesting because this facing is designed to go all the way around the whole shirt, so across the bottom, sides, top, the whole thing. The only time I have ever done this is when I made Gertie's coat. So it's just really interesting that this way of construction is kind of comparable for a coat because obviously this is not nearly as structured as that. And then I am pressing those seams. No need to finish them because they are all going to be hidden by a lining. And now that I have the facing done, I am going and sewing around the inner edges and finishing that seam. So when it's all done, I will have a finished seam on the facing and it will look really, really nice and neat. It's also interesting because what they have you doing here is actually top stitching part of the facing onto the lower part of the facing. I had kind of a challenge figuring out how to do this in a way that would not leave me with the wrong amount of facing to go around the circumference of the bottom, and I definitely made a little bit of an error here in how much I sewed down. But once that's done, it's time for me to get all my layers together. I'm first pinning the lining to the main bodice, so that way all my seams are enclosed. So I am doing wrong sides together here. And then when I go and put the facing on, I'll pin those right sides together because those will then flip in and completely cover all my raw edges, and it will look super beautiful inside this garment. And yes, here I am understitching as always. I'm understitching down around the bottom of the hem and anywhere on the facing that there's enough of a straight line for me to understitch. Again, this makes your clothing look so much nicer because everything folds and irons to be the way you would like. And once that's done, I'm going around for a press, and look how neat those finishes are. These are pressing up so well because I understitched. It's really key. And then the other thing I'm doing is I'm making sure to turn out my corners nice and sharp. I have clipped every single corner and curve to make the ironing and like kind of pushing out, inside outing of these seams work really, really well. So I'm just going around and giving things a really nice press. Pressing makes such a difference in the garment, and it's very tempting to skip it. Honestly, one of the biggest skills of making clothing is ironing. Sorry, none of us like it, but it is the truth. And now it is time for me to focus on the sleeves. I'm actually pretty excited about this because these sleeves are super weird. So the first things I'm doing here is I am pinning the top portion of the sleeve to the bottom. Basically, the way these sleeves are puffed is not just through gathering, although gathering is part of it. But because you're pinning these together, it's kind of like making almost like a globe or more triangle-y shape than if you were to just use gathering by itself. These seams will actually be out in the garment because I'm not lining the sleeves, because I find lining sleeves kind of annoying, but I also find it kind of warm when you're actually done. So I am finishing these by pinking them, and then I am pressing my seams open to see how I feel about the stripe play I worked so hard for when I cut them out. And I do think these are quite fun. Here I am sewing together the cuffs, which I have measured carefully how wide I want them on my own arm. Often the 1940s patterns are not as wide as my arms, so I make sure to measure and then add at least an inch, if not 2 inches, for ease in the cuff, so that way it is a comfortable wear. If you look to the right of this footage, you can see the tiniest bit of Spooky's face poking into the frame. Here I am putting in the gathering stitches for both the top and the bottom of the sleeve. Wow, these are going to be a puffy sleeve. What I'm doing here is I am first gathering the bottom of the sleeve into the sleeve band. And with that done, I am ironing the cuff into submission, first ironing it completely open to get it nice and flat at the top of the cuff, and then I will turn it in and press it with a clean edge for me to go in and hand sew later to finish it. Bear with me on the lighting here, but it is now evening time, so the sun is coming in. Here, what you see is me easing in the sleeve slash kind of gathering in the sleeve, I guess, since it's technically a very puffed sleeve. I'm following all guided marks. This is always important to do, so that way your sleeves come out symmetrically on each side. Once I sew these in, it is time for me to yank out all the gathering stitches. I will always find this a very satisfying part of the process. And then here I cut some bias strips of the lining fabric, and I am going to use those bias strips to have a seam finish on the sleeves, so that way there's no raw edges around the seams. It's so wild to me that earlier in my practice of sewing, I used to not finish my arm sleeve holes at all, and that's where things can get really raggedy and you're more likely to encounter fraying, because that's a really high friction point between your body and your clothes because you're always moving your arms around, at least I am. So it's really important for me to have these finished. The other bonus of when you put these in using a bias binding is then you have a second row of stitching. So if you move your arm too sporadically, as I do, if you rip that first row of stitches, you probably have that second row of stitches that will still keep your arm in your sleeve. I have never had to use that before. And except for the buttons and buttonholes, which I am waiting to do all of these at the end, I am wrapping up this blouse. All I need to do is hand stitch around all of the edge to stitch the facing down. I am using still kind of more like a blind hem stitch here, even though I am in the lining and I can be a lot more careless because these are not going to show all the way through. Honestly, lining this bodice as a decision was a 10 out of 10 decision for me. Not only will it make it less sheer and easier to wear bras with, but it also makes it way easier to have to stitch down a facing that goes all the way around the whole perimeter of the bodice. So yay for my good choices. And with the most complicated piece done, we are now moving on to the skirt. I'm getting quite excited. The set is turning out like a dream. So first with the skirt, I am starting on the most complex part of the skirt, which is these pockets. Pockets in general are pretty easy to do, but this skirt has multiple layers on its pockets. So they're a little bit different than what I've done before, and I'm excited to show you. First, what I'm doing is I'm pressing down my edges, and I'm making these kind of little pleats in the corners so they look nicer when I actually sew them down. This is something I have not always taken the time to do, but I do think makes a little bit of a difference. And I just want to really feel very proud of this garment, so I'm doing some extra steps that sometimes I'm a little too lazy to take. And then I am again ironing some fusible interfacing onto the waistband because again, I like those to be a little sturdier. And I'm ready for my next bit of playing with stripes, which is putting that horizontal band on top of the skirt pocket. After sewing the band down horizontally, I need to finish off the little corners. These are kind of like little waistbands for your pocket, and so I am doing a similar technique to that. You can really see what I meant by that by when I am pressing this. So I've cut my corners and I have flipped the band inside out, or right side out, I guess. And then I have put a little bit of a fold over in the pocket before I will then iron this down. And then my next step will be to hand stitch this little band part down, so that way then the top of the pocket is nice and clean and nothing gets weird or caught in it. This is a new technique to me and it was kind of fun and honestly really usable for other things. You don't even really need a pattern for it because you can just cut essentially again a waistband for your pocket. What a novelty. Now it's time for me to pin the pockets onto the skirt pieces they will go on. Look at how fun all these stripes going all these different ways are, and also these pockets are ginormous, which is very exciting. And I'm just going around and top stitching the pocket, obviously leaving the top open. And I am ironing these seams. Here what is happening is I am just pressing these open, and I am not doing any pinking on the seams because all these seams are clean seams because I either ripped my fabric on grain or it is the selvage ends. And I have left a opening for the zipper on one of the sides. I skipped this with my short zipper because it was lined, so I felt like there was an extra sturdiness, but I'm going to iron in some zipper tape here. This just helps with the sturdiness around your zipper, so your fabric is a little bit less likely to like go into the teeth of your zipper, but also it makes it way easier to sew in a zipper. I don't sew in zippers without these unless they are fully lined. And here's a different angle with the same process. I am going down and around this zipper, again, not using pins, and this is the exact same method for the shorts, just with a slightly different angle, so hopefully this is useful for you. And I know from having sewn a bunch of these playsuits before that 1940s playsuit patterns tend to hit me about where I want, because they're in general supposed to be a little bit of a shorter skirt than maybe your average skirt, and I like things to hit me right below the knee, so I'm going to go ahead and just finish off this hem because I likely won't need to press it up more than 1 or 2 inches. And now I'm going in and I'm adding in the gathering. I do 3 rows of gathering stitches, and in this case I did go all the way around the skirt. This is not that full of a skirt because it is 1940s and we don't really see those full skirts until the 1950s. And also because of the width of my fabric, I have these down by about, I think there's about 4 inches less to gather than if I had honestly just, to me, wasted a bunch of fabric. And now I am gathering these. I have used my own custom marking, which is doing it by fourths because of the fact I have gone a little bit off script on the fabric I was using and how I cut it. I've checked and divided things into fourths to make sure my gathers are perfectly even all the way around. And after sewing these together, I'm again doing my favorite activity, which is pulling out those gathering stitches. You've seen this step before. I'm doing the exact same thing where I am poking out my corners, poking out my tabs, and then I will have this all pressed over so it's a nice clean edge for me to slip stitch down to finish off the waistband on the inside. And it's also at this point where I measure my hem allowance that I want and I press that up and pin it and get it ready to hand sew down with those little invisible stitches. With that done, it's time to have a little bit of a hand sewing fest. Here I am hand sewing the waistband before then moving on to the hem. Now with all the pieces done, it is finally time for me to put in the buttonholes. I waited on this for a couple different reasons. One of the reasons is I just wanted to do them all at once because it's easier to get your buttonhole machine thing all set up at one time instead of resetting it up again and again, and it also gives you the most consistently sized buttonholes since it's easy to accidentally like make your buttonhole wider when you're setting this up. And because I'm using these fun little strawberry buttons that do not have like a good consistency because they're like shorter and wider in different things, it's good for me to have this all done at once. So I need to do 3 buttons on the blouse, 1 on the waistband of the shorts and 1 on the waistband of the skirt. And with those buttonholes done, I can now do the stitching for the buttons themselves, which are these cute little strawberries that I think match this fabric perfectly, and I am absolutely delighted with them. And this wraps up our sew along, so let's go hop into that reveal. Alrighty, you have seen this reveal. I went to my favorite strange little wildflower spot where the city has put in a butterfly garden around a utility building they no longer use. So hopefully you enjoyed that. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and hop right into the cost breakdown as well as my final thoughts on this pattern and this project. So I have my spreadsheet here and we're gonna run through the costs. So the fabric was $38.95. That is between the lining I used as well as the fabric I picked up in Korea. The fabric I picked up in Korea was around like, I think $5 or $6 a yard, or maybe I calculated $8. But regardless, this is kind of what my guesstimate was because I did buy it in Korea. I don't have an exact receipt. And then the notions was $10.60. It was really the buttons that drove up that price because it does have quite a few buttons on it, and then it also did use quite a few zippers because it did use 2. And then the pattern was the most expensive, but I will use this pattern again so it will get cheaper over time. Since this is my first time using it, it is a full price pattern, and this pattern was $59.54, which is pretty wild, but I really like it, and like I said, I'm going to use it a ton, and I also think I'm going to alter certain things. So that brings us to a total of $109.09 for supplies. Oh, we have a friend coming. No, we don't. She decided not to come. Tell her she's rude. This used about 5 yards of fabric. And then as far as labor, I have these all broken out first by what I did with it. So the cutting took 3 hours. This is because it's stripes and I was very carefully pattern matching because this fabric is special to me since it reminds me of traveling. So I spent more time cutting it than usual. The shorts only took me 2 hours and 45 minutes to make. The top took me 4.5 hours to make. And then the skirt took me 2 hours and 45 minutes as well. Shorts and skirts are always pretty basic, quick pieces. It's usually tops with all like the inset sleeves and stuff like that that really take a lot of time. But that total hours is, it took me 13 hours to do this project. And on this channel, we talk about living wage. So most garment workers and people, like pretty much any clothing you buy often is not made in fair labor practices. One of the big ways you can look at this is using the site Good On You, who does an analysis of companies and what their labor situations are like. But usually people are being paid as low as like 2 cents per garment when they make it. But here on this channel, like I said, we talk about a living wage. In Seattle, a living wage is about $32.70 an hour. So I'm going to multiply the 13 hours this took me by $32.70. And that brings us to a labor total of $425.10. I know this is not a equal comparison necessarily because factories have certain efficiencies. However, in most cases, factories do require like a certain number of garments per worker. Like they are not making this super assembly line style. It is is comparable. You aren't going to see an item this complicated probably made anymore, but I think it's so important to talk about. That brings this project to a total of $534.19 if I was going to sell this for just my cost of labor and my cost of materials. No profit, no nothing built in. That is what I would need to charge to pay myself a living wage as well as cover the material costs. That wraps up the cost breakdown, and now we're gonna hop over to the pieces themselves. I guess we'll talk about shorts first since I did make the shorts first. These are super cute. I really like wearing them. I wore these around in Colorado a little bit, and I do feel super cute in this outfit. This is definitely going to be a super useful set for me because it has a bunch of different colors in it, but is also kind of like basic. So I'm super pleased with this, and I think it's so cute, and I'm very happy with these. In the future, I might take the gathers and either work them into pleats or something. I don't know how I feel about these gathers like right here on my hips. That is the only thought I have on this, but otherwise they work great and they're super cute and I love them. The skirt, I similarly don't have much to mention. I really like this. It is a little bit like less gathered than maybe the one in the pattern because I did widen the waistband quite a bit, but I'm pretty pleased with my pockets and like kind of like the fun diagonal, horizontal, whatever stripe play. I really embraced playing with stripes on this piece. And I'm so glad I did because I think it turned out really cute. And these pockets are really giant and I can put a ton of stuff in them. So of course I love that. And then last we'll talk about, to me, the star of the show, which is this top. As I was about to go into, I think I will be making a pattern version using this pattern of this top that will actually go all the way down and not just be a crop. Well, I absolutely love the crop. The crop is a little bit less useful in my lifestyle because I can't wear this to work, but I absolutely adore this sleeves and the neckline and the button down. So if I can just extend this pattern, I think we're in great shape. And I would probably take out some of the pleating, or not the pleating, the dart to do that. But it's so darn cute. I absolutely think this top is a stunner. Again, I think I can mix and match it, and I absolutely adore the sleeves. Again, I did some pattern play. That meant I was cutting technically off grain, but I'm really happy with it because it kind of is like, I don't know, just like fun, I guess, for lack of a better term. I just really enjoyed having fun with stripes in this pattern. I'm also really glad I did the extra time to line it. This has just like that bit of lining that gives it a little bit less sheerness, as well as just like comfort, because it means all my darts and things are like covered, which is always handy in a piece like this that does have so many darts. And of course, I adore the strawberry buttons I chose. I think they turned out super, super cute. I adore this top, and I can't wait to make some more of it that are a little bit more practical in my wardrobe. I'm also thinking about like moving buttons to the back, or I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about this top. I think there's a lot of ways I can use this pattern and alter it for a ton of different really, really cute styles. And the sleeve pattern that with like the seam down the middle of the sleeve is just not something I've seen before, and I think it results in a really beautiful sleeve form. So I plan on definitely just using this sleeve a lot to try some different things. Honestly, I don't feel like I made any sewing mistake, which feels like a bold thing to say, but this all went together really easily and smoothly, and I'm really, really, really proud of it. And I feel so good when I wear this, and that is really all you can ask for in clothing, is that it makes you feel beautiful. It's also super functional. This was my plan for if I was able to get tickets to the Taylor Swift Eras tour to wear. However, I was not able to score those tickets without them costing about a month's rent. So I did not go. So instead, I wore this on some dinners and things like that. And like I said, it was super comfy. I might add like about a ½ inch to the waistband of both the shorts and the skirt just for a little bit more comfort, but otherwise they worked really well. So that wraps up this video. As always, if you enjoy this, definitely subscribe and stick around. I would love to have you, and I have tons of great sewing projects coming up. I do sewing projects every other week, but I do have a video every week at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And then of course you can support me by buying me a coffee over on my Ko-fi. I do all this work pretty much for free, given the ad revenue for each video peaks out at about $30 right now. So I'm not even covering the cost of my supplies, let alone the cost of my labor. And then of course there are the free ways you can support me by giving this video a thumbs up or commenting down below. I always love hearing your thoughts on projects, or if this has inspired you to try a new project. I will see you next week for whatever video my heart desires. Bye!